Man, Boosie got a kid that's serving that's gonna die in prison named Marlo Mike. And I want the world to Google Marlo Mike and look at the Marlo Mike story. Marlo Mike is y'all Woody, who y'all love so much, who mama died on him. This kid is battled mental illness, so he's a little slower than Woody. He was subjected to violence and murder and death at a very early age, so grew up in a violent environment, like the dogs Michael Vick bred to fight and kill. He didn't come from love. He wasn't good in school.
So nigga Boosie killed 9 people, went to trial for 5. Used a 16-year-old to kill 5 people, and this kid didn't make over $50,000. He paid $2,000 per hit. And people saying God on his side. You're a damn lie when he got a 15-year-old doing life in prison. And by the way, I helped work on that law to try to get this kid out. It's called JLWOP, Juvenile Life Without Parole. I went to Washington, D.C. over 4 or 5 times. We got it abolished, but you know what? They didn't make it retroactive for the boy Boosie used. So that's why this is personal to me, nigga.
This kid got locked up for these charges, and you abandoned this kid.
The same teenager who was once accused of carrying out violent acts before he was even old enough to drive is now trying to distance himself from that past. After years of silence and serving life without parole, while Boosie was eventually released and rebuilt his career, Marlo Mike Louding is said to be reconsidering his loyalty. And if that's true, this could seriously change how people look at the entire Boosie situation. Now let's slow this down, because this story gets heavier the deeper you look into it. To really understand what's happening, we have to rewind and talk about who Marlo Mike actually was. He wasn't some grown, seasoned street figure with decades in the game. He was a teenager, 15 years old, a kid from Baton Rouge who got pulled into serious street drama way too early. His real name is Michael Louding, but around the city, everybody knew him as Marlo Mike. Before he was ever connected to Boosie, he was just another young boy growing up in a rough environment, trying to survive. And Baton Rouge in the mid-2000s? That city was tense. Different crews clashing, street business booming, and artists like Boosie and Webby putting the city on the national map. But with fame came pressure. When your name starts ringing bells in the rap world and you're still moving in street circles, attention follows. Not all of it good. Rivalries grow. People start feeling threatened. And it's been said that Boosie felt that pressure heavy during that time.
Man, Boosie got a kid that's serving that's gonna die in prison named Marlo Mike. And I want the world to Google Marlo Mike and look at the Marlo Mike story. Marlo Mike is y'all Woody, who y'all love so much, who mama died on him. This kid is battled mental illness, so he's a little slower than Woody. He was subjected to violence and murder and death at a very early age, so grew up in a violent environment, like the dogs Michael Vick bred to fight and kill. He didn't come from love. He wasn't good in school. And so he grew up in Baton Rouge, another violent environment. So he come from a violent home, violent neighborhood, violent environment, and then get in touch with Boosie. And Boosie funded 9 murders for this kid. Now a lot of people say, oh, he was already killing before Boosie. Okay, so what? Why not take him and bring him in for him not to kill? Because he look up to you.
Back then, around 2005 and 2006, Boosie, still often called Lil Boosie, was climbing fast under Trill Entertainment. Songs like Zoom and Wipe Me Down were everywhere. The club loved him. The streets respected him. But behind the music success, there were ongoing tensions in Baton Rouge that were bigger than radio hits. And this is where things get complicated. According to court records and public reports, Marlo Mike eventually became involved in violent incidents tied to ongoing disputes. But here's the part people debate to this day. Was he acting on his own? Was he influenced? Or was he just a young kid caught in something way over his head? Because let's be real, at 15 years old, your brain isn't fully developed. You're impressionable. You're looking for guidance. And sometimes, the wrong influence changes your entire life. Now, years later, if Marlo Mike truly is reconsidering his silence, that could reopen conversations many thought were finished. And whether people believe Boosie was directly connected or not, this situation still sparks strong opinions across the hip-hop community. And trust me, we're only scratching the surface of this story. At the center of all this is something people don't talk about enough. Marlo Mike was just a kid, an impressionable teenager who likely grew up listening to Boosie, watching him rise from Baton Rouge to national fame. To a young boy in that environment, Boosie probably looked like the blueprint. Money, status, respect, the whole package. And when someone like that brings you close, gives you attention, makes you feel important, a lot of teenagers would do whatever it takes to prove they belong.
Who next, Boosie? We ain't killing no one. Niggas, what I want you to do. I'm gonna show you how to get your security license. You're gonna be my security guy. I'm gonna go get your gun license. I'm gonna put you in the military, nigga. We'll go learn. So if he was already killing for Boosie, okay, that's cool. When Boosie fund 9 murders, just with him alone. They both get charged for 5 murders. This kid didn't get caught. They already had caught Boosie. They caught both of them. This kid just so happened to confess, but at first he wasn't confessing. At first he was staying down. It's only so much sleep a 15-year-old kid can get after killing 9, 10, 11 people. The kid ultimately confessed, agreed to testify against Boosie. Boosie started putting the money up, threatening him, having his family be killed. This kid retracted and they know this. So there's no sympathy for Boosie. When I'm a part of a law that y'all keep overlooking, it's called JLWOP, Juvenile Life Without Parole. I worked on that law. There's an amicus brief that went to the Supreme Court that my name is stamped on this law.
You want to show you're loyal. You want to show you're solid. You don't question things the way an adult might. That's just reality. Now here's where it gets heavy, because we're not talking about one violent incident. We're not talking about 2. Court records connected Marlo Mike to multiple fatal shootings, 9 victims in total, 9. And again, this was a 15-year-old, too young to vote, too young to legally buy cigarettes, too young to rent a car, but somehow mixed up in situations most grown men couldn't mentally handle. Prosecutors claimed he carried out these acts during ongoing street conflicts in Baton Rouge, and according to testimony presented in court, the alleged payments were around $2,000 per incident. $2,000. That number keeps coming up in discussions around the case. Think about that for a second. In the music world, artists can spend more than that in a single night on jewelry, outfits, or just showing out. Yet here was a teenager allegedly risking his entire future for amounts that, in the bigger picture, weren't life-changing money at all. If you do the math, 9 incidents at $2,000 each would total $18,000, not even $20,000. And that's where people start asking serious questions. Was this loyalty, manipulation, desperation, or just a young mind being influenced by an environment that normalized violence? Because to a 15-year-old from a rough neighborhood, $2,000 probably felt huge. That could mean new sneakers, designer clothes, helping out at home with bills, short-term wins that look big when you're young. But long-term, the cost was devastating. Life without parole, a permanent label, a future erased before adulthood even started. People in Baton Rouge weren't blind to what was happening. The streets talk, even when nobody speaks publicly. There was an understanding that tensions were high, rival groups clashing, money disputes, personal beefs. But the code of silence runs deep in environments like that. Nobody wants to be labeled a snitch. So rumors stayed whispers for a long time.
I watched Boosie say that, oh, I went making in Beirut or Louisiana, wherever he from.
Yeah, Baton Rouge.
Yeah, I'm just like, where that come from? You feel me? Like, why are you speaking on me? You feel what I'm saying? It's like, but if I speak on you, you ain't like it. I don't know what's going on in your camp because I don't pay attention to it, but from what I'm seeing on the internet, this kid got locked up for these charges and you abandon this kid. Don't say nothing about me because y'all niggas want to be something that y'all can never be. You wasn't the one putting in the work. That kid was. What Charles White say? If a nigga push him too hard, he gonna have a diabetes attack. Diabetic, whatever, however you pronounce it. When you get on these Vlad interviews and niggas know Vlad get on that payroll. You feel me? Like, I been to the feds. I don't see gangsters get burned in the feds. I didn't have nothing but a 922 G1, which is a possession of found by convicted felon. My bond was denied. You feel me?
One of the most talked about cases involved Terry Boyd, who lost his life in October 2009. Prosecutors stated that Marlo Mike was responsible for that shooting. That case, along with several others, became central to the larger investigation that eventually pulled Boosie into the spotlight as well. Now, it's important to say, Boosie was ultimately acquitted in the murder-for-hire trial connected to these accusations. A jury found him not guilty. That part is official. But the story didn't just disappear, the conversations never stopped. And today, with rumors that Marlo Mike may be reconsidering his silence, people are wondering if more details could surface. Not confirmed, not proven. But the possibility alone has Baton Rouge watching closely. Because when stories like this resurface, they don't just reopen old cases. They reopen old wounds. Prosecutors claim that Boosie ordered certain hits and that Marlo Mike carried them out without hesitation. That was the narrative presented in court. And Terry Boyd's case was just one of several incidents that were brought up during the investigation. When the full scope of the accusations came out, even people who were used to hearing about street violence were stunned. 9 separate fatal shootings connected to a 15-year-old, that's not normal under any circumstance. It made people step back and ask, how does a teenager even get that deep into something like this without any adult stepping in? But here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough: the mental toll. Because yes, the court painted Marlo Mike as someone carrying out serious violence. Yes, money was allegedly involved. Yes, he was trying to build a name in the streets. But underneath all that, he was still a kid. And when you're that young, your mind isn't fully developed. You don't have the emotional tools to process extreme trauma. Experts have said for years that teenagers are more vulnerable to pressure and influence. So imagine stacking that kind of weight on someone who hasn't even finished growing mentally. There have been reports and testimony suggesting that Marlo Mike struggled mentally after the incidents. Trouble sleeping, guilt, stress, and if that's true, it wouldn't be surprising. We're talking about multiple families impacted, multiple funerals, a city shaken. That kind of weight doesn't just disappear. Meanwhile, Boosie was continuing his music career, touring, recording, living the life of a rising rap star. That contrast is what makes this story hit so hard for some people. One life moving forward publicly, while another sat in silence dealing with what had happened. Now again, it's important to be clear. Boosie was acquitted in the murder-for-hire case. A jury found him not guilty. That's documented. But the emotional and psychological side of this story, that part still raises questions. Because eventually, something major happened. Marlo Mike confessed. And here's where the situation really shifts. Reports state that he walked into a police station and admitted his involvement, not after being cornered in some dramatic chase, not after a public betrayal. According to official accounts, he voluntarily confessed. That shocked a lot of people. In street culture, staying silent is often seen as loyalty. There's a strong code against cooperating with law enforcement. So when news broke that he had confessed, reactions were intense. Some people labeled him a snitch. Others said he was just a teenager who couldn't carry that burden anymore. And if we're being real for a second, imagine being 15, sitting alone with memories like that. No therapy, no guidance, no healthy outlet to unpack trauma. Just silence and pressure. That can break anybody, especially someone that young. Some observers believe the guilt became too heavy. Others think he may have feared future consequences. And some argue that maybe he just wanted to tell the truth and face whatever came with it. We can't say exactly what was in his heart at that moment. Only he knows that. But what we do know is this. Once that confession happened, everything changed. Investigations expanded. Charges were filed. Boosie himself was arrested and faced serious accusations before ultimately being cleared of the murder-for-hire counts. The streets were divided. One side saying loyalty above everything, the other side saying accountability matters. And in the middle of it all, a teenager whose life was permanently altered before adulthood even began. And now, years later, with rumors circulating that he may be willing to speak even more openly, people are watching closely. Because if new details surface, it could reignite debates that never fully cooled down in the first place. On one side of the debate, people still say he broke the code. But on the other side, there's a completely different argument that this was a teenager who got influenced by someone with far more power and experience. Let's be real for a second. Boosie was the adult. He had the money, the fame, the industry connections, and years of life experience. Marlo Mike was 15, a high school kid trying to prove himself, trying to earn respect, trying to feel important around someone he likely admired. That power dynamic matters. When you're that young and a successful rapper, someone who made it out of the same city you're stuck in gives you attention that can feel huge. It can feel like opportunity, like validation. And at 15, most teenagers don't have the wisdom or foresight to fully think through long-term consequences. You live in the moment. You chase approval. You want to belong. That's what makes this story so complicated. Because while prosecutors painted a picture of organized violence, others see a vulnerable kid who didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what he was stepping into. Now here's where emotions really run high. Boosie went to trial facing multiple serious charges tied to these accusations. Prosecutors argued that he orchestrated violence and used others to carry it out. They presented testimony, recordings, and evidence in court. But in the end, the jury found him not guilty on the murder-for-hire charges. Legally, he walked free.
Yeah, like you can see, I saw somebody told me something about a video of me getting beat up in jail. I never been in. I'm like, I don't go through stuff like this in jail. I'm somebody, I gotta respect. I don't go through stuff like this. But other people, I don't go through nothing like that. I don't got to.
So hold on. So the video that they've been showing, that wasn't you?
Yeah, no, that was at Hunts. This is my first time at Hunts. I've been Hunts like about 6 months, 7 months. I ain't never been at Hunts.
Wow.
It's one of the dudes that was on another charge with me. Somebody was seeking clout on him and popped him, but I guess they wanted to put it like me, get him some views. I get views, so that's what they like them views. They got him a few 100,000 views. I don't know, but it's beneath me. That's what they want to do. I just try to chart my course and be the person I was created to be. I found out who I was supposed to.
And once he was cleared, he returned to music, dropped projects, did interviews, continued building his brand. From a legal standpoint, he beat the case. That's a fact. But Marlo Mike, his situation looked very different because he had already confessed. He had already admitted involvement in the shootings. And despite being a juvenile at the time of the crimes, he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. No second chance, no scheduled release date, just prison for the rest of his life. That decision alone sparked major debate. Some argued accountability was necessary because lives were lost. Others argued that a 15-year-old should never receive a sentence that offers zero hope of rehabilitation, especially considering modern research about adolescent brain development. By the time he was formally sentenced, he had just turned 16. And then came Angola. Officially known as the Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola is one of the most notorious prisons in America. Built on the grounds of a former plantation, it has a long, complicated history. Inmates work fields. It's massive, isolated, and known for housing individuals serving long-term sentences. For many in Louisiana, being sent to Angola means the system does not expect you to come home. So imagine that reality hitting at 16 years old. Supporters of Boosie say the court system worked the way it's supposed to. The jury didn't see enough evidence to convict him beyond reasonable doubt. Supporters of Marlo Mike say the system failed to account for youth and manipulation. And that's why this case still divides people today, because it forces uncomfortable questions about influence, about accountability, about whether teenagers involved in extreme violence should be treated purely as adults, and about who truly holds responsibility when power and youth collide. There are no simple answers here. Just a story layered with legal battles, street politics, and life-altering consequences that still echo through Baton Rouge years later. A lot of people look at this situation and feel like the outcome was unbalanced. In their eyes, a teenager was sent away to spend the rest of his life inside one of the toughest prisons in America, while Boosie continues living freely, building his brand, going live on social media, performing, hosting events, and moving like nothing ever touched him. From a legal standpoint, Boosie was acquitted. The court cleared him of the most serious accusations. That part is documented. But emotionally, public opinion is a whole different courtroom. Because while Boosie returned to music and business, Marlo Mike remained behind bars with a life sentence. And when you think about it, that contrast is what keeps this case alive in conversations. One man moves forward. The other sits in Angola with no scheduled release date. Some people frame it like this. There's a difference between giving orders and carrying them out. Between the leader and the follower. Between the person with power and the teenager trying to prove himself. That narrative has stuck with a lot of observers. Now here's where the story takes another turn. Charleston White enters the picture. And if you know Charleston White, you already know he's outspoken and unapologetic when it comes to issues involving youth and the justice system. Charleston has been publicly advocating for changes to juvenile sentencing laws, especially something called JLWOP, juvenile life without parole. His position is simple. Teenagers, Even those involved in serious crimes should not automatically be sentenced to die in prison because their brains are still developing. And he's not just talking emotionally. He often points to scientific research. Studies show the parts of the brain responsible for impulse control, long-term decision-making, and risk assessment aren't fully developed until around age 25. So his question is, how can a 15-year-old be judged with the exact same lens as a fully developed adult? Charleston has reportedly traveled to Washington, D.C. multiple times advocating for reforms, meeting lawmakers, working with organizations, telling stories like Marlo Mike's to push for change. And here's where it gets interesting. The U.S. Supreme Court did rule that mandatory life without parole for juveniles is unconstitutional. That decision changed sentencing practices in many states. But the part that frustrates activists? Not every ruling automatically applies retroactively. In some cases, individuals who were already sentenced before those changes still have to fight for resentencing on a case-by-case basis. And that process can take years, sometimes decades. That's why Charleston has been so vocal. He argues that while laws evolve, people like Marlo Mike remain locked up under old sentencing structures. He's also publicly criticized Boosie, claiming that influential adults should be held accountable when teenagers are pulled into destructive situations. Now, Boosie has denied wrongdoing in court and maintains his position. Legally, he beat the charges. That part hasn't changed, but Charleston doesn't hold back. He's called Boosie out in interviews, on social media, and during public appearances. He even suggested he'd step into a boxing ring with him to settle things physically, though that's more talk than official action. At the core of Charleston's argument is this: when young people look up to powerful figures, that influence carries responsibility. Whether people agree with him or not, he's kept this conversation alive. And now, with renewed attention on Marlo Mike's case, especially rumors that he may be willing to speak more openly, the debate feels louder again. Is this about justice, manipulation, accountability, reform? That's what people are still arguing about today, and the answers depend on who you ask. Charleston put it bluntly. He basically said Boosie can sleep peacefully because he never physically carried anything out himself. Meanwhile, that baby, as Charleston calls him, was 15 years old carrying the weight of 9 lives. And according to that narrative, the guilt is what pushed him to confess. Charleston's point isn't subtle. He questions how someone can celebrate, throw parties, drop music, and move forward publicly while the teenager tied to the violence sits in prison battling his conscience. That contrast doesn't sit right with a lot of people. Now, to be fair, some will argue that Marlo Mike made his own choices. He admitted involvement. He carried out the acts. Personal responsibility does matter. But others push back and say a 15-year-old doesn't process consequences the way a grown adult does. Influence is real. Power dynamics are real. When you're young and someone with money, fame, and status gives you direction, that can cloud judgment. Add in a lack of guidance, no strong mentorship, and limited options. It becomes easier to see how teenagers can get pulled into things they don't fully understand. Charleston frames it as a bigger issue than just one case. He says this is a pattern. Older figures with influence allegedly benefiting while younger ones take the fall. Leaders keeping their hands clean while the followers face the harshest consequences. And that's where the conversation expands beyond Boosie and Marlo Mike. Because in hip-hop and street culture, there's often debate about the messages young listeners absorb. Some critics argue that glorifying violence can influence impressionable teens. Others say music is just art reflecting reality. The truth probably sits somewhere in the middle. But what can't be ignored is this: teenagers are watching. 14, 15, 16-year-olds absorbing everything, seeing money, respect, fame, and thinking that's the fast lane to importance, without fully understanding the cost. Charleston believes the system profits from that cycle. Music sells, controversy sells, street stories sell. But when young lives get permanently altered, the industry doesn't always stick around for the aftermath. Now, whether you agree with Charleston White or not, his argument forces uncomfortable questions about influence, about accountability, about who really benefits and who really loses when young people get pulled into violent environments. And at the center of it all is still Marlo Mike, a name tied to one of Baton Rouge's most controversial chapters, a case that refuses to fade, a debate that's far from settled. Charleston keeps pressing the same question. How can someone live comfortably while a teenager tied to the violence is sitting in a cell replaying everything in his head? That contradiction is what fuels the outrage for a lot of people. He challenges the idea of loyalty in street culture. How do you preach codes and honor, but the youngest person involved ends up carrying the heaviest consequences? That's the part that doesn't sit right with many observers. Now let's be balanced. Some will say Marlo Mike made his own choices. He admitted involvement. He wasn't forced in a physical sense. Personal accountability matters, but at the same time, a 15-year-old doesn't think like a grown man. That's just science. When you're young and someone successful, wealthy, and respected gives you direction, that influence hits different, especially if you're lacking guidance at home, especially if you're chasing validation. That combination can cloud judgment fast. This situation also highlights a bigger pattern people talk about in hip-hop and street environments. The individuals with money and power often have access to strong legal teams and resources. Meanwhile, the younger ones, the ones trying to prove themselves, end up facing life-altering consequences. And this isn't just about Boosie and Marlo Mike. Critics argue this cycle shows up again and again. Older figures influencing younger ones, street credibility being marketed, violence being glamorized in music, and teenagers absorbing it without fully understanding the cost. Now, not everyone agrees with that take. Some say music reflects reality, not creates it. Others believe influence comes with responsibility. That debate isn't going anywhere anytime soon. But one thing is clear, young listeners are watching. 14, 15, 16 years old, looking at fame and thinking that's the fast track to respect, without realizing how quickly things can spiral. At the end of the day, this story feels bigger than just one case. It's about influence, about choices, about who pays the highest price when power and youth collide. And if there's any lesson people pull from Marlo Mike's story, it might be this: don't let anyone, no matter how famous or respected, steer you into something that could cost you your future. Because when everything settles, you're the one left living with the consequences. At the end of the day, the harsh reality is this: the person who acted is the one sitting in a cell, while others move freely. That's the contrast Charleston White keeps pointing out. He and others believe Boosie, at the very least, could use his platform to speak on juvenile justice reform, not even about admitting guilt, because legally he was cleared, but about pushing for change so other teenagers don't end up with life sentences before they're old enough to fully understand their decisions. Now, maybe there's more to the story. Maybe there are details the public doesn't know. That's possible, but perception matters. And in the court of public opinion, a lot of people feel like influential adults should advocate harder when young lives get permanently altered in situations connected to them. This situation feels bigger than just Boosie and Marlo Mike. It opens a conversation about culture, influence, and responsibility, about how violence gets glamorized, about how young listeners absorb what they see and hear, and about how quickly a teenager's life can spiral when validation and pressure mix together. Some say accountability should fall strictly on the individual who committed the acts. Others argue the system should never throw away a child without offering the possibility of growth and rehabilitation. That debate is still active. Courts, lawmakers, activists, they're the ones who ultimately shape what happens next. Right now, Marlo Mike remains incarcerated. Whether he ever gets another chance will depend on legal appeals, evolving laws, and how the justice system continues to interpret juvenile sentencing. That part isn't decided by social media. It's decided in courtrooms. But the conversation, that's happening everywhere. So what do you think? Should juveniles serving life sentences automatically get a second review? Should influential figures do more to discourage violence among young fans? Or is personal responsibility the only thing that matters here? Drop your thoughts in the comments, respectfully, because this is a complicated topic with real lives attached to it. If you made it this far, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with someone who cares about real conversations, and subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown. And check out the next video popping up on your screen right now. We're diving into even more celebrity drama and stories the culture keeps debating. I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp, think deeper, and let's keep these conversations going.